How we doing, real life? Are you guys okay over there? All right. Hey, my name is James Brown, and I serve you as your transition pastor. And if you are new with us, I want to personally welcome you. So glad you're here today. And just to let you know, we are in week number 5 of a 6-week teaching series we've called Origin Stories that's based on the Bible book called Genesis. Now, if this is your first time here, I want to start off the sermon by saying to you, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Just ahead of time, I want to offer an apology. There's a pretty good chance at some point in the next 25 minutes or so that you're going to ask yourself this question. Why in the world did I come to this church on this Sunday? This, you'll say to yourself, is the strangest sermon I think I've ever heard in my whole life. You're going to say that. And the truth is, you're going to be right. You are going to be right. Because we're going to be looking at one of the weirdest stories in the whole Bible. Now, that's going to be some of you. Others of you are going to get mad at me. You're going to be mad at me. Why will you be mad at me, you might ask? Well, because you've been praying for and inviting your friend, your neighbor, your coworker, your family member to come to church, and they've told you no every single time, and then for whatever reason, they said yes today. And in just a few minutes, you are going to say in your own mind, James, why are you doing this to me today? Why are you talking about this topic on this Sunday? Of all the topics that you could have picked in the whole Bible, why did you pick this one? I mean, they showed up today, and after they hear what you say, they're gonna think we're crazy. They're gonna think we're a cult. They're gonna think, well, I don't know what they're gonna think. They're gonna never come back. I do know that. Thanks a lot, man. Thanks for being a team player, my dude. Well, thanks a lot. And you know what? You're right. You're right. So be mad at me if you need to. In fact, if you need to express that anger in any way, make sure that you send all your angry emails directly to me at amymonson@reallifecov.com. And I'll make sure to get back to you right away. Right away. Now, apology tour is over. Are you ready? Are you ready? Yeah, I don't think you are. All right, here we go. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to do it anyway. So if you have a Bible or if you have a Bible app, I want to invite you to open it up and go with me to Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6. And buckle up because it's going to be a bumpy ride. Now, we know so far from the Genesis story that the time between the fall of humanity in Genesis 3 and where we're going to be in Genesis chapter 6 is about 1,600 years. And so that's where we're going to pick up the story. In Genesis chapter 6, we're going to start in verse 1, which says this. Then the people began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them. Now, there's been a huge boom in population on the planet, and there's also been, at the same time the population is growing, there's also been an exponential and compounding increase in deviant activity and depravity in human behavior. In fact, the writer of Genesis here starts to describe this transition in the very next verse, in verse 2, which says this. The sons of God saw the beautiful women and took any they wanted as their wives. Now, you may read a verse like this, or the one I just read, and you would say, you know what, JB, that doesn't sound like the start to the weirdest story in the Bible. Why all the hype? Why are you like hyping this story up in this way? I mean, it looks like some righteous dudes wanted to get married, so they found them some wives. Like, is that the hype here? Well, that's what it looks like on the surface, but that's not exactly what's going down here. You may not know this. In fact, as some of you have been reading the origin story booklet that we provided, the book of Genesis, if you're new and you haven't gotten one of those are also out on the table. Grab one for free. It's the book of Genesis without all the numbers and titles and all that stuff. It just reads like a novel. Grab that for free and start reading through the book of Genesis. But everybody I've challenged to read through the book of Genesis comes back to me and they say to me, you know what? Wow, I never saw this or that or this thing in there. I've never seen that before. And that happens a lot with what we're going to be looking at today. And even though we may not have seen it in the story, biblical scholars have been divided and they've been debating about these verses, specifically the verse I'm about to read here in a little bit, for thousands of years. Specifically on this verse, they've been trying to figure out who in the world are these sons of God that's mentioned here, that the sons of God saw the beautiful women and they took them as their wives, as many as they wanted. Now, who are these sons of God? Well, some of the scholars that have dug into this, they would say that they're godly men, like we just talked about, that they're some sons of God, some people, some men that believe in God, that try to follow God, and they wanted to get married, so they found some wives. Some people believe that's what this verse is about. Others have concluded that the sons of God are oppressive human kings, that that verse is actually describing bullies, tyrants, maybe monarchs that are possibly possessed by demons, and so they're going after these women. That's what some scholars have concluded. Other scholars have concluded that the sons of God are actually angels. In fact, the phrase sons of God shows up almost exclusively in the Bible to refer to angelic beings. Interestingly, in the Bible book of Job, the phrase sons of God is used to describe angelic beings that are sort of showing up and attending a celestial staff meeting. Like they kind of show up to this thing, and they are referred to as the sons of God. Still others offer that they are angels, but that they're fallen angels. You got to remember that the Bible records that about a third of the angelic beings decided to follow Satan, Lucifer, and they were cast out of heaven, and now they're considered to be demons. People refer to the sons of God in this situation as them. There's also, I'll give you a bonus one, that I know one guy that thinks it's aliens. In fact, he's a pastor buddy of mine. He told me this, and I'm like, really? And he said, oh, yeah. I read it on the internet, so it's got to be true. And I'm like, how'd you become a pastor, man? Like, what in the heck? So anyway, you're like, well, which one is it? Like, of all these options, the sons of men, I mean, these are kind of important people in the story. Which one is it? What's the answer? And if you were to ask me personally, I would tell you with confidence, I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. No one really knows the answer. I think the majority interpretation and majority opinion about this, and I'd probably put myself in this category, is that it's number 4, that it's fallen angels. So just hang with me for a second. If that's correct, that these sons of God are fallen angels who are sort of having forced intimate relationships with some of the women of the earth, I think the technical term for that occurrence, that kind of occurrence, is creepy, like totally creepy, right? Strange, weird, totally weird. And as parents, we had the kids in here a little bit ago, just in case you're wondering, we decided to sync up the lessons in children's ministry today. So they're studying the same, no, I'm kidding. We're not teaching the celestial assault, unholy matrimony in Real Kids this week. We're going to cover it next week. So just so we're clear. Kidding, again, don't rush to get your kid. Now, this is an important part of the story because it gives us some context to what's about to happen next. And this is where it starts to heat up. Look at verse 3. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. I think God goes here because what he's observing is that things are becoming a little bit chaotic, quite a bit unhinged, and God's patience is beginning to wear thin with what has been happening. So thin, in fact, that the days of men and women living hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, like we saw in Genesis 5, that time is over. That's over. God puts an expiration date on humanity, and the new shelf life that he creates is 120 years. Which, by the way, does anybody know who the oldest living person is right now? Anybody know? No, it's Maria Brañas Morera. Maria Brañas Morera. She was born on March 4th, get this, 1907. 1907 in San Francisco, California. Ms. Morera is a Spanish-American, aged 116. 116. She's 116 years old, which is amazing. The person prior to her died at 119, right? So God sort of kept his word here. Like that's kind of where the ceiling is for human birthdays. And even though God has kept his word, my guess is what we're going to read next might be something that you've never heard before. And you're going to be like, man, you're right, James, this was weird. This sort of sounds like some abhorrent Avengers plotline here. And honestly, if I wasn't reading it, if I couldn't see the words with my own eyes and read them, I would never believe that this was in the Bible. But it is. Check it out, verse 4. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. If you're looking for a life verse or tattoo, maybe, this is going to be a good one for you. Maybe choose this one. Don't choose this one. This is weird, right? Nephilites, heroes and warriors in the ancient times. What in the world is going on here? Well, it seems sort of fantastical to us, but actually archaeologists recently have unearthed a picture of one of these Nephilites. And I'm going to show you what it is. You see here. Why are you laughing? Why are you? I don't get it. Yes. From this far up. Yeah, no, I don't know if you know Brock Lesnar. That's his body. Wrestler for the U of M and WWE star now. From here up's me. That's not actually a picture. We don't know that much about them, except for this. Interestingly, the word Nephilite, Hebrew word, which means essentially giant. And this word Nephilite's mentioned again at a couple times throughout the Bible, Numbers chapter 13 being one of them. My guess is you've heard of one of the probably Nephilite's most famous members, a little guy by the name of Goliath. But he wasn't a member of this original group. The name Nephilite means giant, so it was applied to different groups. And this is sort of the original, the OG Nephilites, the original group. And so were these Nephilites, were they sort of these half-angel, half-human giants? Were they some sort of Hercules-like characters in the early years of humanity? Again, we don't know. We have no idea. We have no idea because God didn't actually tell us. I don't know what they were exactly, but this is what I do know, is that if we sort of get caught up trying to solve the mystery of the Nephilites, trying to run down the rabbit trails of Enoch here and there, we actually end up missing the whole point of this passage. You see, I think that God included these verses in our origin story as if to say, you know what? I'm not going to tell you exactly what they were because, more importantly, I want you to see what it was like in the world in which they live. I don't want you to get sort of fascinated and hung up on who these guys were, but I want you to see what it was like when they were around. And that world that they lived in gets described in the very next verse. Look at it in verse 5. The Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth. Look at how it's described. This is amazing to me. And God's looking at the wickedness across the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. I mean, this is amazing to me as this is the descriptor. He looked over humanity and he saw that everything they thought and imagined was constantly, consistently, totally evil. See, I think what God's trying to get at here is the fact that humanity has hit a new high in its low point. That in the origin story of humanity, we're now hitting a crest. We're hitting the apex of sin. And to reinforce that reality, this diagnosis gets repeated a few verses later in verse 11. Check it out. Now God saw that the earth had become corrupt. And he uses this word corrupt 3 times in 2 verses. And it was become corrupt and was filled with violence. Verse 12. God observed all this corruption in the world, for everyone on the earth was corrupt. I think you see the theme of these 2 verses, right? The people in Genesis 6 have fallen into a cesspool of sin so deep and wide, so pervasive, that it has infected and infested every aspect of their existence. As you track the origin storyline, you see that the evil one who slithered into the garden just a few chapters earlier has won over an entire culture now. And amazingly, if you look back over Genesis 6 and begin to analyze that society for just a second, you'll begin to notice that there's 4 different cultural distinctives that emerge out of the story. There's sort of 4 different cultural, societal themes that this Genesis 6 society, what it sets it apart. And you can see them on the screen. 1, hero worship. 2, sexual perversion. 3, widespread corruption. And then number 4, violence. Hero worship, sexual perversion, widespread corruption, and violence. And that was a descriptor of the context then. And man, I'm so grateful that none of those 4 describe our current cultural condition. Hashtag sarcasm, right? But this is why we read then in verse 6. And this is where the story shifts a little bit. So the Lord, looking at all of humanity, the Lord was sorry that he had ever made them and put them on the earth. You see God experiencing some sort of regret at his own imago Dei, at his own image, at the apex and pinnacle of his creation. He's experiencing sadness and sorrow. In fact, put that verse back up for a second. It says, this reality, it broke his heart. It broke his heart. The brokenness of these people in this moment, it broke his heart. Which is interesting because just 6 chapters ago, Genesis 1, God leans back and he looks at everything that he made and he declared it to be very good. But now, not so. And his heart was broken about it. And to me, that's one of the saddest verses in the whole Bible, is this verse where it broke his heart. But one of the saddest verses in the Bible is then followed by one of the most shocking verses in the Bible. Look at verse 7. And the Lord God said, in response to what he saw, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth, because I'm sorry that I ever made them. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, this is a hard one to grasp. You know, the John 3:16 verse, for God so loved the world he gave, is hard when you have to sort of juxtapose that to Genesis 6, that shows us that it is possible for God to get to the point where he says, no more, no más, basta es basta, enough is enough. That it's hard to imagine, at least for me, God looking at his created creation, this image that he made of himself in humanity, that he looks at it, that it has become in such a place that he looks at it and he sees it as beyond recovery. That seeing humanity, he sees it as a cancer that has to be removed, or else it's going to kill everything around it. That he looks at humanity and he sees a building that is condemned, that can't even be repaired. And it's so bad that it has to be leveled. It has to be torn down. That God looks at humanity and he sees a diseased tree that can't be nursed back to health. It has to be cut down. I don't know about you, but for me, it's hard to believe that God can get to that point. But this story tells us that he can. And it's that point when humanity intentionally turns its back on the Creator and on one another. That's the point at which God is in this story. And it's also the point at which the Creator's heart gets broken as well. These broken people break his heart. God is sad, but he's mad. And as I think about that, I think that's sort of good news a little bit too. Because God wouldn't be God if he did nothing about that. He can't allow that kind of cancer to grow. He can't allow this sort of epidemic of evil to not find a final moment. And so he declares that his grace has a deadline. Judgment is eventually coming. And then we're going to look at that as we wrap up the story next week in this series. We're going to look at Noah and the flood, sort of the final mark in that moment. But today, I want to just share with you a little bit of my own wrestling with this passage. Like, What's the point? Why are we engaging with this? Why did God include it in his origin story? Why do we need this strange story in the Bible? And as I've spent time reflecting on this passage over the last few years, I have a couple questions. And one of them is this. Are we now living in the days of Noah? Right now, are we living in the days of Noah? In other words, does our culture sort of mirror what we see back in Genesis 6? Are we getting close to that same sort of situation in our own society and in the world? And I would say that, and I'm speaking personally here, I think in many ways we are, which is why I just want to bring to your attention a statement that Jesus made about what happens when this cultural condition strikes again, when it comes back. What does it look like? In Matthew 24, verse 37, it says this. This is Jesus talking. He says, when the Son of Man, and Jesus used that term to refer to himself a lot of times in the gospel. Jesus says, when I return, something Jesus said he's going to do, we can count on it happening, it's inevitable, he's coming back. Jesus says, when I return, the catalyst or the evidence or the thing that you can be looking for to know that it's near is this. It will be like it was in Noah's day. It will be like what we've been looking at in the first 7 verses of Genesis chapter 6. And what does that look like? Well, verse 38. In those days before the flood, the people were enjoying banquets and parties and weddings right up until the time Noah entered his boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen until the flood came and swept them all away. And that's the way that it will be when the Son of Man returns. Are we getting close to that? Maybe. What I find interesting about that, though, is that the people back in Genesis 6 that Jesus is talking about in Noah's days, that they were completely clueless about what was going on. They were going to weddings and having parties and doing life just as they normally did. They were clueless about what was happening, that they were swimming in sort of this cesspool of immorality, and that God's patience was wearing thin, that it was running out. They didn't know what was happening. They were clueless. They were oblivious. They were unaware until they were swimming for their lives, until they were drowning because of all the life decisions that they had made. And so real life, I want us to not make that same mistake. That we can have our radar up for what culture is like and ask the question. And just ask the question, are we living in the days of Noah? Is that happening now? And that leads me to my second question that I've sort of been contemplating about this, which is this. If we are living in the days of Noah, then what are we supposed to be doing about it? Like, what's our response as a church, as followers of Jesus, as Christians? What's our response? And I would say that the answer to that question is actually in the question, which is this, Noah. That's the answer, Noah. And I'm going to end today where we're going to pick up next Sunday, which is this. Verse 8. But Noah found favor with the Lord. So in the midst of all this, in the midst of the darkness of that day, there was one solitary life, one person. And if you read his story, you find out one extremely flawed, imperfect, incredibly imperfect, very human being. But he was somebody who took a stand when no one else would. One individual who decided to go north when the rest of the culture was heading south. One person who decided to swim upstream against the thinking of society in that day. And we learn more about what that stand looked like in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7, which describes the impact that he made this way. It said, by his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world. By his faith. Another way to translate that, maybe more accurately, is by his faithfulness to God, Noah condemned the rest of the world and received the righteousness that comes through that faithfulness. And so the question that I want us to wrestle with as we end today is this. Does that type of faithfulness describe our lives as well? Does that type of faithfulness that Noah demonstrated in that moment in Genesis 6, does it sort of look like our faithfulness as a church, as individual followers of Jesus? Do we look like that in our own faithfulness? Are we willing to go against the grain when we know that what is happening around us breaks the heart of God? And maybe ask yourself this question. I'm going to get a little personal here. Is there anything different about the way that I live? Is there anything different about the way that I live? You can pull those questions down right now for the time being. Is there anything different about the way that I live? Is there anything unique about my faithfulness to God that would stand out in a crowd? Stand out to the people around me. Stand out to my family members. Stand out to my friends. Let me dig a little deeper. Is there anything different about the way that, as a husband and a wife, is there anything different about the way that we communicate with one another? Is there anything different or significant about how we talk about or raise our children? As children, is there anything different about the way that you relate to your parents or talk to your parents than other people around you? As a family, is there anything different about the things that we do or the decisions that we make or the stuff we buy or the things we say? Maybe in person or online on social media that would separate ourselves from the other people around us. Our faithfulness to God, does it make us any different? Is it like Noah's faithfulness when we go to work tomorrow? When we think about the way that we run our business or the way that we show up to the job or come to the office or the factory or the way that we interact with our employees or our colleagues or our coworkers, or the decisions that we make about how to close the deal or how to achieve the next benchmark or the next goal. When we think about our work through this lens, is there anything significantly different about the way that we do those things? Is the faithfulness that we exhibit in the workplace something that honors God and points other people to them? You see, I think that's the question that Genesis 6 brings to the surface for us to consider. Does our faithfulness to the Creator describe our lives like it described Noah's life? And I would say if it doesn't, that's okay. Because we're all growing here. None of us have arrived. It's not about the destination as it is about the direction that we're heading. And I would ask, is our life heading in that direction? And so I want to offer just two invitations as I close. First one is this. Consider these questions. As you go today on the table out there, I made like a little study guide. This is one of the ones that you would want to maybe dig a little deeper into because it's so weird. And I put some resources out there to help. Feel free to grab those on the way out and talk through these questions. If you're not in a small group, no worries. Maybe gather some friends or your family and just ask each other these questions on that sheet, on the screen that you see. Consider the questions, and then number two, come back next week. Come back next week. Because as we look at Noah, we're going to together find out what it's going to take to live a life like this, to build a life, to give God the glory with our life, to give God the honor that the world does not. And I'm excited to see what that looks like with you. So let's pray together. God, we thank you for this moment, and we thank you, God, for the good stories in the Bible about love and grace. And God, we're also so grateful for the cautionary tales in there as well that remind us to pause and consider what can happen without you at the center of our lives. And God, as we look at the world around us, our prayer is that we would be different. Not in weird ways, but in ways that bring you glory. In ways that honor you in this world that doesn't honor you. And so, God, help us to care about those things, to care about the brokenness around us that we know breaks your heart. Help us to feel that, to know that, to see that. And then to step in those moments, to be the lone voice even that points people right back to you. Not just with our words, but with the light of our life as well. And God, we thank you for Jesus and his connection to this story. And we truly do long for his return. And it's in his name that we pray. And all God's people said, amen.